All right, we've got a major update in the case surrounding 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez, and it may finally offer insight into what actually happened. As you know, Celeste's body was found inside a Tesla allegedly registered to singer David back in September in Los Angeles. To date, no arrests have been made and no charges have been filed. There has been reporting, particularly from TMZ, that an investigative grand jury in LA may be hearing evidence related to this case, which we've discussed before. But one of the biggest unanswered questions remains: how did Celeste die, and what exactly happened to her body? That question becomes even more complicated when you consider that the cause and manner of death have not been released. According to the Los Angeles County Department of Medical Examiner, a court order initiated by the LAPD placed a security hold on Celeste's case. As a result, no details, including the medical examiner's report or cause of death, can be released until further notice. At the same time, LAPD's Robbery Homicide Division issued a statement addressing media reports claiming Celeste had been decapitated or that her body was frozen. LAPD flatly denied those claims, stating that her body was not frozen when discovered and that she had not been decapitated. They also clarified that the court order sealing the records was intended to ensure detectives received critical information before it became public, not to undermine transparency. Now, here's where things take a disturbing turn. Private investigator Steve Starby, who was hired by the owner of the Hollywood Hills property where David was reportedly staying, has made public statements that raise serious questions. That property was searched by authorities and was located near where the Tesla was found. Steve has previously hinted that physical evidence at the residence suggested there may have been plans to dispose of Celeste's body. While he said he couldn't reveal everything, he described the findings as scary and sadistic, suggesting the Tesla may have been a temporary holding location rather than the final plan. Most recently, Steve posted a detailed statement on X clarifying his earlier remarks. He said that items found at the residence were things you would expect to find on a farm rather than in a home in the Hollywood Hills. One of those items was a burn cage incinerator capable of reaching 1600 degrees. For context, human cremation typically occurs at approximately 1400 degrees. Steve emphasized that such an incinerator has no legal or legitimate use at a residential property within city limits. While some have suggested it could have been a prop for a video, Steve raised several questions. Why was a 55-pound burn cage delivered to a private residence instead of a production company? Why was it ordered under a false name? Why was it never used in any video production? Importantly, Steve stated the burn cage was never used and remained new in its packaging. However, given that Celeste's remains were ultimately found in the trunk of the Tesla associated with the residence, he said the presence of an incinerator raises serious questions about intent, even if it does not rise to the level of criminal evidence. The item was not seized during the search warrant, possibly because it had not been used and fell outside the scope of the warrant. Still, Steve noted that additional items were found that could have been used in conjunction with the burn cage. He also revealed the deliveries were accepted under a false name. Retired detective Matt Irvin weighed in on these revelations, stating he could not think of any legitimate, innocent reason for a burn cage to be delivered to a private residence, especially under an assumed name. While acknowledging there could be benign explanations, he questioned why law enforcement would not seize such an item, noting that investigators can request an addendum or piggyback warrant to collect unexpected evidence found during a search. Can have long-term consequences. Whether those choices were strategic or simply cautious remains to be seen, but they will almost certainly be scrutinized if charges are ever filed. And if this case does move forward to court, the narrative will shift. What is currently speculation will be tested against sworn testimony, forensic analysis, and documented evidence. That's when we'll learn which theories hold up and which ones collapse under legal scrutiny. Until then, the case exists in a painful limbo. No official conclusions, no public accountability, and no clear explanation for how a 14-year-old girl ended up in circumstances no child should ever face. What remains undeniable is this: Celeste Rivas Hernandez deserves justice. Not headlines, not rumors, justice. And as investigators continue their work behind closed doors, the responsibility on the public and on those covering this case is to remain patient, critical, and compassionate. Because at the center of all of this is not a mystery to be consumed, but a life that was lost far too soon. We'll continue to follow every verified development, every court filing, and every official update as they come. This story isn't finished, and when the truth finally emerges, it needs to be handled with the seriousness and care it demands. Because in high-profile cases like this, silence isn't neutral. It creates space. space for theories, space for mistrust, and space for the very misinformation investigators say they're trying to prevent. When official channels go quiet, unofficial narratives fill the gap, and those narratives rarely favor truth. One of the most troubling aspects here is the question of intent. Not just how Celeste died, but what happened afterward. The movement of her body, the location where she was found, and the reported presence of items that suggest planning all point to actions taken after the fact. That shifts this from a question of a single tragic moment to a series of decisions made by adults, not a child. And those decisions matter legally. Post-death conduct often reveals state of mind. It can distinguish panic from calculation, negligence from intent. That's why investigators focus so heavily on what happened after the death, sometimes even more than how the death itself occurred. Another key issue is who knew what and when. Rarely does something like this involve only one person. Even indirect knowledge, delayed reporting, or silence can become legally significant. That's where grand juries come in, not to announce conclusions, but to quietly test stories against evidence. At some point, though, that quiet process collides with public accountability. When investigators ask for patience, they're asking the public to trust that progress is happening behind the scenes. That trust is fragile, especially when information appears selectively, denied in one statement, hinted at in another. For Celeste's family, this isn't a legal exercise or a media puzzle, it's an open wound. Every delay extends their grief. Every unanswered question keeps them suspended between mourning and waiting. And that's why this case continues to resonate, not because of celebrity proximity, not because of speculation, but because it forces us to confront a hard truth. When systems slow down, victims don't get time back. Eventually, there will be a moment when this moves forward, whether through charges, a public report, or a formal announcement. When that moment comes, the focus must return to what truly matters: accountability, clarity, and justice for a child who cannot speak for herself. Until then, this remains an active, evolving situation, and we will continue to follow it carefully, separating fact from rumor, documenting verified developments, and keeping Celeste Rivas Hernandez at the center of the story, where she belongs. Matt also pointed out that the discovery of Celeste's body in a vehicle suggests an incomplete attempt to move or dispose of her remains, possibly due to panic rather than planning. He emphasized that most crimes are not carried out by sophisticated criminals, but by people who make rash decisions when overwhelmed. The discussion also highlighted how unusual it is for the medical examiner's office and LAPD to issue statements that appear to conflict. In Los Angeles, those agencies typically work very closely together. The continued seal on the medical examiner's report remains one of the most puzzling aspects of the case. According to Matt, it is highly likely that the medical examiner already knows everything they're going to know about Celeste's cause and manner of death, given the time that has passed. LAPD's concern appears to be protecting the integrity of the investigation, especially if an investigative grand jury is involved, which allows prosecutors to compel testimony and lock witnesses into statements. Ultimately, if an indictment is ever issued, the public may not immediately learn all the details. Much of the evidence would only become public once the case reaches court. For now, Steve Fisher remains the only person publicly discussing the alleged incinerator and its potential relevance. Whether it becomes significant to the investigation remains to be seen, but it undeniably adds another troubling layer to an already disturbing case. And this is where the case becomes even more unsettling, because if investigators are already in possession of all the forensic answers they're likely to get, then the continued silence suggests something else is driving this investigation forward. Either law enforcement is still trying to identify who was responsible, or they're attempting to build a case strong enough to withstand intense public and legal scrutiny. Another factor that cannot be ignored is the role of the investigative grand jury. If witnesses are being called, testimony is being locked in, and subpoenas are being issued, that tells us prosecutors believe there is enough here to keep digging, but not yet enough to make an arrest. That usually points to a complex web of involvement rather than a single clear-cut suspect. And when you look at the totality of what we know, the sealed medical examiner records, the body found in a vehicle, the alleged plans to dispose of remains, and now the revelation of equipment that raises serious questions, it paints a picture of chaos, panic, and possible intent that was never fully carried out. What's also important to note is what has not happened. No one has publicly taken responsibility, no suspect has been named, and no official timeline explaining Celeste's final hours has been released. That absence of information is often just as telling as what is being disclosed. If the incinerator truly had no role in Celeste's death, investigators may view it as context rather than evidence, but context matters, especially when determining mindset, preparation, and intent. Even unused, such an item can signal what someone was considering doing, not just what they ultimately did. At the heart of all of this is a 14-year-old girl whose life ended under circumstances that remain deeply unclear. While speculation continues online, the most important thing is accountability, wherever it leads. This case isn't about rumor or shock value, it's about uncovering the truth of what happened to Celeste Rivas Hernandez and ensuring that those responsible are held to account. As more information comes out, whether through court filings, grand jury developments, or official statements, we will continue to follow this closely, because this case is far from over and the questions surrounding it are only getting louder. And the longer this case remains unresolved, the more pressure mounts on every institution involved. Public trust hinges on transparency, and while investigators have a responsibility to protect the integrity of their work, prolonged silence often fuels speculation instead of preventing it. What makes this case particularly difficult is the age of the victim. When a minor is involved, every unanswered question carries additional weight. Investigators must be meticulous, but the community also deserves clarity, especially Celeste's family, who are left waiting for answers that may never fully bring closure. There's also the issue of proximity. Whoever was involved had access to a vehicle, access to a residence, and access to time. That narrows the field, even if it doesn't yet point to a single individual. In cases like this, timelines become everything. Who was where, when, and why, and any inconsistency, no matter how small, can become critical. Another layer to consider is the reported handling of physical evidence, items not seized, leads not immediately pursued, and decisions made early in an investigation.